film, when you see him making this tape recording predicting his assassination, that wasn't contrived. He actually believed that. I used to tease him about it and tell him he wasn't important enough to be assassinated. But he was killed by a former colleague, a former member of the Board of Supervisors, a former police officer, a man named Dan White, who was very troubled and I think clearly confused about homosexuality, homophobic. I don't want to claim that I have any great insight into what was going on in his mind, but he was very troubled and very much in over his head in the day-to-day dealings of the Board of Supervisors, and he assassinated both Harvey Milk and our mayor, a wonderful man named George Moscone, on November 27th, 1978.
And it was you who was walking towards Harvey Milk's office when you saw?
I was outside of City Hall when the shootings occurred and was frightened by all of the confusion over towards the mayor's office, which is on the other side of City Hall, and I let myself in through the back door to the supervisor's chambers and found his body there in
recognized his feet.
Yeah, Harvey only had one pair of dress shoes, these old battered wingtips. You know, it was terrible. It was terrible, and I remember thinking all day long, it's over. Everything's over. You know, he was really a father figure to me. I'm very close to my actual father, but at the time I was estranged from my family, and he was so kind to me, and he was our leader, and all day long I just kept thinking it's over until the sun went down. And San Franciscans, gay and straight, young and old, black and brown and white, began to gather by the tens of thousands and lit their candles and marched down to City Hall. And then I knew it was really just beginning.
And now, decades later, you are organizing this march on Washington. You're also the co-founder, the founder of the AIDS Quilt, and talk about the significance of that and how it's led into this mass march.
Yes, I've had a lot of experience organizing protests and demonstrations, but you know, back in the 80s when the pandemic was so horrifying and so many of my friends were dying, I was struggling with new ways to try to communicate to the media and to the public and the politicians about what was happening to my community, and I was also obsessed with the reality that most of my friends were dying, and it seemed to me that we were all going to die and leave no trace. And my friends were brilliant people. You know, had they lived, they would be taking home Emmys and Pulitzers and Nobels and sitting in the Senate and the House of Representatives. And so I was struggling with a way to break through the stupidity and cruelty and ignorance that still hampers our planet's response to this pandemic. And I was at a protest where we climbed up the walls of the federal building in San Francisco and covered it with names of people who had died. And as I looked at that patchwork of names, I thought it looks like a quilt, and thought immediately of my grandma, my great-grandma back in Bee Ridge, Indiana, and it worked. I think it's important to go to Washington, and we're going back on October 11th. We're not taking a quilt, we're not having a rock concert, it's not going to be Lollapalooza, it's going to be a demonstration, a protest. It is not against President Obama, it is for equality, and it's for shifting the strategy. Back when Harvey Milk was alive, we had no choice with this strategy. There were only a few pockets in the entire country where we could gain any rights at all. When I came out of the closet, it was a felony to engage in sexual behavior with another person of the same sex. People went to prison. People committed suicide. People were arrested regularly and prosecuted. For young people, it may be bizarre to hear this, but it was illegal for us to dance. Two people of the same gender were forbidden by law from dancing. You could be arrested for that. So in the 70s, we took whatever we could get. If in a small college town like Ann Arbor or Madison, you know, you might be able to get some kind of job protection. But that was a long time ago, and we're not putting up with that anymore. We want full equality, which I define as being equal protection under the law in all matters governed by civil law in all 50 states. It's the 14th Amendment. It's the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. that's what we want.
We're talking to Cleve Jones, who's organizing a mass march for gay equality on October 11th in Washington, D.C. We're going to talk now about the military policy. As a presidential candidate, Barack Obama vowed to work to overturn the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy on gays and lesbians in the military. But since taking office, Obama's made no specific move to do so. Last week, the Supreme Court decided not to hear a challenge to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. In a brief, the Obama administration had said that Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy is rationally related to the government's legitimate interest in military discipline and cohesion. Conceived in 1993 by the Clinton administration, Don't Ask, Don't Tell allows gay military personnel to serve as long as they don't disclose that they're gay or engage in homosexual conduct. Over the past 15 years, the policies led to the dismissal of nearly 13,000 members of the U.S. Armed Forces, and it's still U.S. law under Commander-in-Chief Barack Obama. Nathaniel Frank is the author of Unfriendly Fire, How the Gay Ban Undermines the Military and Weakens America. He's also Senior Research Fellow at Palm Center at the University of California, Santa Barbara, which does research in areas of gender, sexuality, and the military. He's joining me from Chicago. We're also joined on the telephone from Washington, D.C. by Clifford Alexander. He is the former Secretary of the Army under President Carter, the first African-American to hold that post. He also served in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations as a presidential advisor on civil rights, and he's worked for years as an attorney in Washington, D.C. And, oh, by the way, on this day leading into Father's Day, he happens to be the father of Elizabeth Alexander, who read her poem for the inauguration of President Barack Obama. Happy Father's Day, Clifford Alexander.
Thank you, Amy Goodman.
It's good to have you with us. Talk about Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You were Secretary of the Army, and where you stand on this today, what you're doing about it.
The policy is an absurdity and borderline on being an obscenity. What it does is cause people to ask of themselves that they lie to themselves, that they pretend to be something that they are not. There is no empirical evidence that would indicate that it affects military cohesion. There is a lot of evidence to say that the biases of the past have been layered on to the United States Army. It has several negative ramifications. One is the fact that the people who are presently serving, and that's thousands and thousands who are gays and lesbians, they have to lie every day. It's like asking a Jewish person to act like he or she is a Muslim, or asking a Catholic to act like he or she is Buddhist, taking their fundamental values and exchanging it for silence. A second issue is, of course, that people who would want to serve in this nation's armed services, because of their specific orientation sexually, will not do so because they don't want to engage in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. What we need to have, I think, immediately is an urgency about this issue, and an urgency that goes well beyond the President of the United States, but also to the Congress, because it's my understanding that the legislation has to be repealed with other legislation. So I understand in the House there is some movement in that direction, but what I do not sense is that there is an urgency about this issue on the part of Americans, whatever their particular sexual orientation might be. This isn't really just about, obviously, gay or lesbian people. It's about what we stand for as a country, what the military is, how we can get the best skills in that military, and that, most importantly, I think, the way we are treating people who presently have to lie about their particular sexual orientation. It's not the way this country should operate.
As the former Secretary of the Army, do you have President Obama's ear?
I don't have his ear. I'm an old friend of his. I've known him for many, many years. I don't pretend to be his advisor. I have not talked to him since he's become president, and I do think that what I understand is that he has heard this from many people. He certainly has read it in many newspapers and many editorials, and I have spoken publicly about it. He would hope and think that he'd know what my own opinion would be on it. It is something that, obviously, I believe he should speak out on. I do think, however, that the initiation of something has to come from from the Congress. It is not something that he personally can change. So it should be directed, yes, to a certain extent at him, but to a great extent to the broader legislative bodies, and seeing to it that they don't talk about it in terms of, oh, well, we'll get to this after we fix the economy. Let's get to it because it's an important issue to fix right now.
We're speaking with former Secretary of the Army Clifford Alexander. We're going to break, and when we come back, we'll also be joined by Nathaniel Frank, whose book, Unfriendly Fire, How the Gay Ban Undermines the Military and Weakens America, looks at how gay men and lesbians have been treated in the military. Stay with us.